It didn't begin with drama. No scandals. No shouting matches. Just a slow, deliberate unraveling, the kind that happens when two people who once built an empire together begin quietly stepping away from it. Jeff Bezos and MacKenzie Scott had spent over 2 decades side by side. From Amazon's earliest chaos to the height of global dominance, they'd been partners in more ways than one. So when news broke that they were divorcing, most assumed the split would be straightforward, amicable, maybe even generous. After all, MacKenzie had been there from the start. She wasn't just a spouse. She was part of the origin story. That's why everyone expected she'd walk away with a meaningful share of the fortune, but Jeff had other plans. To the public, their split looked measured. Civil, dignified, even. But behind the scenes, something colder was unfolding. See, MacKenzie wasn't just Jeff's wife. She was there from the beginning, when Amazon was nothing but boxes in a garage and a dream big enough to bankrupt them. She'd helped shape the foundation. She'd raised their children, sat through late-night brainstorms, and watched Jeff grow into a figure almost too big for real life. So when the divorce was announced, everyone assumed one thing: she'd walk away with a substantial part of the fortune she helped build, but Jeff had been thinking differently. At first, no one noticed the legal movements. There were no headlines, no statements, just paperwork. Quiet, methodical, unremarkable unless you were paying attention. And that's when I caught wind of it: a subtle shift in ownership across a network of assets. Real estate, stocks, private holdings, shell companies. Not sold, not liquidated. Just transferred. To one name. Not a new girlfriend, not a distant cousin. No, the name was familiar. Almost poetic in its simplicity: Jackie Guys. Jeff's mother. Now, to most, this meant nothing. A billionaire moving wealth between family members. Standard fare. But to someone with a trained eye, someone who understood how the courts viewed marital assets, this was chess, not checkers, because by the time MacKenzie's legal team began their deep dive into what could be claimed in the settlement, what they found was less than expected. Much less Amazon stock. Legally, no longer in Jeff's name. The space company? Controlled by a trust. Properties in D.C., New York, Beverly Hills. Held by holding groups tied to, you guessed it, his mother. Now, this wasn't about being petty. Jeff wasn't dodging child support or trying to vanish. He played it smart. Nothing illegal. Just expertly timed. And all of it happened before court proceedings officially began. The sort of move that lives in the gray zone: legally sound, ethically murky, and emotionally explosive. And here's where it got even more calculated: that he didn't tell her, not a word, that he sat through mediation, emails, even face-to-face meetings. He was calm. Gracious. Cooperative. But never specific. He let her legal team burn through hours, assumptions, and spreadsheets, all leading to an illusion, and the reason, according to someone very close to the case, someone who watched it unfold from the conference table across from Jeff himself: he wanted to see her face when it happened. He wanted to watch what happened when she realized the empire was still standing, but her name wasn't on the gate. That I know how it sounds. Cold. Maybe even cruel. But Jeff Bezos didn't become Jeff Bezos by playing like everyone else. In business, in space, and apparently, in divorce, the day of the final court session was oddly quiet. No cameras. No press outside the courthouse. Just a few lawyers, a judge, and 2 people who used to share a toothbrush. MacKenzie came in composed, smartly dressed, chin held high. Jeff arrived alone. No security detail inside. Just him, a dark blue suit, and a look that didn't blink once. What happened next didn't make headlines. But I saw it. The judge went over the terms. The attorneys exchanged final confirmations. Then, the list of assets to be divided was read aloud, and that was the moment. MacKenzie's eyes flicked upward, just slightly. Not panic. Not rage. Just confusion. Like realizing the map you'd been using suddenly led to a cliff. She leaned over to her attorney, whispered something. He whispered back. Her expression didn't change, but her hands once neatly folded began to curl inward. Jeff sat still, silent. Not gloating. Not triumphant. Just, watching. By the end of the session, it was official. The divorce was finalized. The world would assume a graceful, if bittersweet, separation between two high-profile figures. But those of us in the room knew better. MacKenzie Scott walked in expecting to claim part of an empire. She walked out with dignity intact and almost nothing else, but the story doesn't end there. Because what happens when the world's most powerful man wins and doesn't flinch? What happens when silence becomes strategy, and what, exactly, did it cost him? You could see it in the way she stood still a second too long after the judge spoke. Not frozen, just, processing. MacKenzie had always been poised even when the cameras swarmed, even when the press speculated endlessly about what she'd get, what she'd do next, how much of Jeff's kingdom she'd take with her. But no camera captured that look, the quiet realization that the numbers she expected were now ghosts on paper. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. That would have made it easier to read her. No, her strength was in restraint, and that made her silence deafening. Her lawyer leaned toward her again, whispering, likely confirming what she already feared. The holdings were gone, not illegally, not suspiciously, just cleverly, methodically moved out of reach. It had been done long before court was in session, back when the narrative was still that of a respectful separation. Bezos remained still, his face unreadable. If he felt anything, he didn't show it. There was no smile, no gesture of satisfaction, just the same surgical detachment he was known for in business deals. And maybe this, too, was a deal in his mind. A strategic exit. An equation, not a heartbreak. When the papers were signed and the attorneys began collecting their files, MacKenzie stood. Her posture perfect. Her expression calm. But her eyes flicked toward Jeff just once, and in that single glance was every unspoken word, not betrayal, not even hatred, just quiet disappointment. As if the man she thought she knew had been replaced by someone who now only operated in systems and shields. Outside, the world still didn't know. The headlines spun polite phrases: settlement reached, private terms agreed. Some reports praised the mutual respect, the dignity of it all. But the numbers told their own story, and those who followed closely noticed the absence. No stock transfer. No billions exchanged. Just a quiet end, oddly incomplete. Inside certain financial circles, however, the move was whispered about with a mix of awe and discomfort. It was brilliant, they said. Ruthless. Perfectly legal. And perfectly cold. MacKenzie didn't speak to the press. No statements. No post-divorce interviews. But those close to her noticed a shift. The philanthropic spark she later became known for, the rapid donations, the massive giving, it didn't come from victory. It came from the void. From losing something that wasn't just about money, but about the belief that fairness still had a place, even at the top. She didn't fight Jeff in court. But she answered in the only way she could, by giving away what little she had kept, faster than anyone had before. A silent rebuke wrapped in generosity. As for Jeff, he carried on, as expected. Publicly untouched. Privately insulated. To him, it was over. Cleanly executed. Efficiently done. But not everyone saw it that way. In certain rooms, among people who understand legacy more than wealth, a different story circulated. Not about billions, but about trust. About the quiet cost of winning too precisely, because even empires built on algorithms and logistics can crack, not from the outside, but from the choices made when no one's watching. Months passed. The news cycle moved on, as it always does. Billionaire divorces are replaced by bigger headlines. Rockets launch. Markets shift. New power couples rise. But there's something about the quiet stories, the ones not captured in interviews or documentaries, that stay with you. This one never went away. Jeff Bezos went back to building. Back to meetings, innovation, the next frontier. Publicly, he was the same: composed, forward-looking, surrounded by data and dominance. But something in the air around him had changed. His inner circle grew smaller. He spoke less. People noticed he smiled differently, a bit tighter, a bit shorter. In interviews, he never mentioned the divorce. He didn't need to. He had won, technically. Protected the empire. Preserved the structure. But victories built with precision often leave little room for warmth. And legacy, real legacy, isn't measured in numbers. It's measured in how people remember your choices. MacKenzie, on the other hand, transformed. What started as a quiet response became something louder than any courtroom battle could have been. In less than 2 years, she gave away more than most billionaires donate in a lifetime. Schools. Community projects. Women's shelters. Rural libraries. Places that would never have seen a dime from the titans of tech now saw millions, and not from a foundation with her name carved in gold, but from direct, fast, humble transfers. No interviews. No speeches. Just action. Some saw it as philanthropy. Others as strategy. But those who paid attention saw something deeper. She wasn't trying to repair her public image. She didn't need to. She was rebuilding something else entirely, something Jeff had quietly dismantled without ever lifting his voice. She was restoring belief. In fairness. In giving. In power that doesn't shield itself with paperwork and loopholes. And here's the part that stuck with me: not a press release, not a quote. Just a moment. A reporter once asked her, gently, what she learned through the process. She paused, then said, "Sometimes the people who claim to build the future forget who stood beside them while they were still invisible." That line never went viral. It didn't trend. But in certain circles, it stayed like a whisper that doesn't leave the room. As for Jeff, he never responded. Not directly. Maybe he didn't need to. Maybe he believed the past was best left unspoken, especially when it's been handled. But here's what I've come to believe: the cleverest man in the room may win the game, but the one who walks away with grace, she often wins the story, not because she fought harder, but because she understood something the world often forgets: that silence, when chosen with dignity, sometimes echoes longer than any headline. And that's what this story really became: not about money. Not about divorce. But about two people who walked away from the same fire, one with everything still in his hands, and the other with everything still in her heart. It took nearly a year before the ripple effects reached the surface. Jeff Bezos, still orbiting his own gravity field, had shifted seamlessly from marital dissolution back into mission control. Blue Origin. Amazon expansion. AI integration. His face returned to magazine covers, his quotes to conference stages. To the public, he was intact, untouched. But people who watched closely noticed something, harder to define. The smile stayed, but it didn't land the same way. The presence remained, but it no longer warmed the room. He had always been strategic. Now, he was beginning to feel calculated. One former Amazon executive put it this way: Jeff always played 4D chess. But after the divorce, it was like he stopped seeing the people on the board as real. Not out of cruelty. Out of efficiency. Clean lines. Quiet exits. No loose threads, but in Silicon Valley, whispers don't disappear, they evolve. Venture capitalists began rethinking their succession models. Founders started signing prenups they never would have considered before. Not because they feared lawsuits, but because they saw what Jeff had done, and quietly wondered if they'd go that far, too. It wasn't just a legal maneuver. It became a case study. At a private investor dinner in Manhattan, someone raised it over scotch. "You hear what he pulled with MacKenzie?" The response was measured. "He protected the mission." Another added, "He lost the partner, but kept the ship." And finally, a third, more quietly, "Yes, but at what cost?" No one had an answer. Meanwhile, MacKenzie kept giving. No public tours. No foundation galas. Just wire transfers and one-sentence statements. She became known as the billionaire who wouldn't sit for a magazine cover. And the irony didn't escape anyone. Jeff had kept the spotlight, but she had captured the soul of the story. Still, no one expected what happened next. In the fall of the following year, a leaked internal memo from a major donor advisory board began circulating. In it, MacKenzie Scott was listed as the most trusted name in philanthropic circles, above Gates, above Buffett, even above her ex-husband's foundations. She wasn't just donating money. She was reshaping what giving looked like: fast, direct, no strings, no credit, that caught attention in places Jeff didn't expect. Two high-profile nonprofits rejected partnerships with one of his projects, not because the money wasn't needed, but because, in the words of one board member, it comes with calculation, not care. Jeff's team denied any tension. They issued no statements. But internally, questions began surfacing. Had the legacy shifted without him noticing? He'd kept the empire. But MacKenzie had taken something intangible: the trust of the public. And not just because of what she gave, but how she'd reacted to what she lost. In a rare private retreat with senior advisors, Jeff finally addressed it. "We did what we had to do," he said. "The company is intact. The mission is on course." No one challenged him. But later, one longtime aide confessed to me, he was convincing us. Not himself. And maybe that's the part no one talks about. When a man at the top of the world makes a move so precise, so flawless, that no one can criticize it, but everyone quietly wonders why it doesn't feel like a win, because even when you protect the castle, if the village outside starts turning away, eventually, you notice the silence. There's no regret on record. Jeff never apologized. MacKenzie never accused. But in their separate paths, something unspoken passed between them, a kind of private acknowledgement that not everything measured is valuable, and not everything valuable can be measured. And so the story continued, not in headlines, but in moments: a boardroom pause before signing a deal. A speech rewritten to sound more human. A journalist hesitating before asking the question they're not supposed to ask: what did it cost to win like that? Even now, I don't know if Jeff asks himself that. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But somewhere, between the numbers and the narrative, the answer waits, not in what was kept, but in what quietly slipped away. It didn't happen at a press conference. Not at a launch event or a billion-dollar forum with private equity giants sipping champagne. It happened in a dimly lit ballroom at a philanthropy summit in Washington, D.C., where the chairs were metal, the tablecloths wrinkled, and the name tags often misspelled. The kind of place where people with wealth come to talk about giving it away, or, at least, to be seen doing so. Jeff Bezos wasn't even on the agenda. His name wasn't printed in the program, and no one expected him to show. Maybe he didn't plan to. Maybe something changed at the last moment. Either way, he walked in just after the second panel began, wearing a plain dark jacket, no assistants in tow. Not trying to make an entrance, and yet every head turned. He didn't sit near the front. He chose a chair along the side wall, where the light didn't quite reach and no one would ask him for a photo. He didn't smile. He didn't check his phone. He just watched. The panel that afternoon was titled Trust, Transparency, and Transformation. The final speaker was a woman in a simple navy dress with no notes in her hands, no slides behind her. She didn't need them. Everyone knew her name. MacKenzie Scott. She didn't mention her past, her ex-husband, or Amazon. She spoke instead about what it meant to give without ego. About how power is rarely surrendered and how true generosity means stepping out of the spotlight, not stepping into it. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't use buzzwords. She just told the story of a school in rural Montana that used a grant from her to build a library, not a digital one, not a tech hub. Just a quiet room filled with books. And how that, sometimes, mattered more than innovation. Jeff watched every second. The room, he was unreadable. But I watched him. His hand stayed still on the chair's edge. His shoulders didn't move. But his eyes didn't blink as much as they used to. And for a man known for controlling the narrative, that was saying something. After the session ended, the audience applauded politely. MacKenzie stepped down without lingering. No press waited for her. No donors crowded her. She headed toward the side hallway, the kind that led to the coat room and exit. That's when Jeff stood up. No one stopped him. No one dared. He didn't call her name. He simply walked across the floor, past a cluster of confused attendees and reached her just before she disappeared behind the curtain. She turned when she heard his steps. Their eyes met. And for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jeff said it softly, almost like someone trying out a phrase for the first time, "You were right." MacKenzie didn't react immediately. Just tilted her head slightly. Not coldly. Not kindly. Just, thoughtfully. Then, finally, she asked, "About what?" Jeff hesitated. The man who'd once launched rockets into space without blinking now searched for a sentence that he took a breath, "About how some things don't belong in spreadsheets." It landed not as an apology. Not even as confession. Just truth late, but real. She nodded slowly. Not as a sign of forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. "I think," she said gently, "we both learned different lessons from the same storm." There was a pause. Jeff looked down, then back up. "I thought protecting what I built was the smart thing to do. Maybe it was. But it didn't feel like winning." Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened. "That's because it wasn't about winning," she replied. "It was about remembering who helped you build it." Silence again. This one longer. She reached out, touched his arm just briefly, just enough to say, "We were real once," and then she walked away. No bitterness. No satisfaction. Just quiet closure. Jeff stood there, alone now. The ballroom had begun to clear. Conversations resumed. Coffee cups clinked. No one interrupted him. And in that stillness, for the first time in a very long while, he looked like a man not in control of the moment but simply inside it. That he never brought it up again, but those who knew him well noticed small changes after that day. Fewer public quotes. More listening. He began speaking at fewer conferences. Delegated more. Smiled less for the cameras, but more in private. Some would say he simply evolved. That he matured into a quieter version of power. But a few of us, the ones who saw what happened behind the curtain, knew better. That he didn't change because of guilt. He changed because silence, once it settles, starts echoing back the things you once chose not to hear. And MacKenzie? She never spoke of it, either. But her giving continued. Faster. Bolder. She didn't take Jeff's empire. She didn't need to. Because in the end, she took something else, the moment, the one that reminded him and all of us that legacy isn't written in stock shares. It's written in who you remember. And how you remember them.